And we're live.
All right, nice. Okay, welcome everybody to Fascio Podcast. Today we're going to be having Richard Spencer here. The co-host again is censored Anon.
Greetings.
And I'm going to go ahead and let Richard introduce himself and anywhere people can find him at.
Hey everyone, thanks for inviting me on. You can. I guess you can find me on Odyssey. That's probably the best go-to place right now where I do the Radix podcast, and I'm kind of focusing on book publishing in the moment. So you can also check out washsummit.com and see kind of some of our new stuff. We have a new book that will come out in August. So very interesting, by Ed Dutton, on witches and feminism. As literal riches. Yeah. So it's a good one. But yeah, I think probably most of your audience knows who I am. Half of them hate me, hate my guts. And then the other half really hate my guts. That's probably how it breaks down.
I got a couple of them saying Hail Spencer in the chat. Not many of them.
We got a few.
You don't see that very much nowadays.
Yeah, it seems like you've kind of gone off to the Radix podcast on Odyssey nowadays, and I don't know if any people bother you while you're over there.
No, I generally think the comments on Odyssey are better, and I mean, I have to be honest. It's been, I guess, like a 3-year process, but I'm just focusing on things that I do, and I'm focusing on my own group of people who are either supporting me or I'm collaborating with. And that's actually going to get a little bit larger soon. It's kind of interesting. But I don't really take part in the movement. I don't know. I think I kind of understand the limits of an online anonymous movement, to be honest.
Yeah,
and it bites. It kind of bites you in the ass, and it doesn't. I don't think it can ever really go anywhere. So I think we need to do other things right now. That's what I'm focused on.
Well, it kind of seems like when you did first start, because I've been following you for a pretty long time. Like I said back during Vanguard podcast. It was more of like a blog, like an intellectual type of movement. It really wasn't like a movement like how I would think about it. And like in Europe,
when you do movement, I think.
Yeah. But in Europe, when we're talking about like actual political movements, a lot of those groups aren't strictly just doing like political activism. It's more of like a social movement type of thing, like you see with Casa Pound, where they do like food drives, healthcare checkups. I don't really see that here. It's more of like flash demonstrations, holding like very offensive like signs that basically like make libs go crazy. Or getting like a bunch of conservatives in the area and just saying a bunch of stuff, and it either turns into like a riot, like it has a couple times, or they just kind of go home and do nothing.
Yeah, I think all of the movement's energy really is online. Now, there are examples of people meeting up and having, beer and pizza and, getting, making new friends and so on. And that's great. Although what that really leads to beyond that is questionable, but yeah, I think it's an end in itself. Activism, I think we've kind of seen the limits of the flash mob in a way. I think there's a kind of so what question lingering in the air at these flash mobs. It's like, what are you doing? Really?
I'm sure you've noticed that with like Patriot Front, like, what are they really doing at the end of the day?
Like recently, that kind of shows you the limit. Like I personally think they look cool. I do like them. Like they do appeal to me like on an aesthetic level, but it doesn't really do anything.
I don't have any problem with Patriot Front. I don't have any connection to Patriot Front either. I don't know anyone who's a member. I don't talk to them or anything like that.
I was in Vanguard. I actually knew Thomas back in Vanguard, and that became Patriot Front after he took over.
Okay. But they generally don't engage in movement discord or infighting or these shibboleth tests and things like that. And so for that, I don't really have a problem with them. And I agree that they can kind of look good. But I haven't looked too much into. Sorry if you hear a squeaky in the background, that's just my dog. I don't know if that's even being caught by the mic, but
that's
anyway.
okay. Yeah, I
couldn't hear it.
Adds to the color of it. Yeah. But yeah, with Philadelphia, I mean, so what I understand, that was a kind of Trump stop the steal type thing, like electoral reform, quote unquote. And they were piggybacking on it. Yeah. Isn't that correct?
Actually,
Or
I don't know, because like my understanding of the my understanding of Philadelphia was that they were just going to do a demonstration, a march through Philadelphia, as they have done for other cities, because they've done it like in like San Antonio, like Dallas, places like that, where they just kind of like they make a path, they walk through that path, and then they leave. That's more or less it.
Yeah,
and they did that in DC like 2 years ago.
Yeah. I talked with George, who's in the Black Front, and he works with Matt Parrott, but he went to this Patriot Front thing they did in Philadelphia. They didn't do any of the stop the steal. They did shout out Reclaim America, which is like a slogan they always do. And then a lot of libs and like leftists.
I have bad allergies today. Just prepare yourself for a lot of sneezing. Yeah.
Oh, it's all right.
Yeah, it's fine.
So yeah, I mean, I remember with looking at like identitarianism in Europe over the past, say, 10 years. I've known about these identitarians in Europe for some time, and I was at one point kind of excited about them. I remember in 2012, I believe, they released this black and white video that was against the generation of 1968. And it was the boomers, basically. And it was saying, you've taken away our future and thus taken away our past, or maybe it was the reverse. You've taken away our past and thus taken away our future, and you don't care about us. You're selfish, and etc. And I thought it was interesting. It was a different. It had a different vibe to any other right wing group, and they would do some things like some of the stunts, releasing a banner. Sometimes doing something like giving out food to the homeless or things like you saw that this was kind of a trend. But I think that kind of also hits a wall at some point where it's how many banners are you going to release? And, there is a welfare state in your countries with social services that are not.
France just outright banned them.
Yeah. Yeah. But at the same time, there was this kind of vague incoherence to identitarians. I mean, the Martin Zellner and company, they were just hopped on the alt-right bandwagon with both feet, back in 2016, and they adopted the aesthetics and the vibe and et cetera. And then after 2017, when the media really started to, post Charlottesville especially, but even before Charlottesville, in fact, I think Charlottesville might have almost even been an excuse more than a cause of this, when the media was just dedicated to destroying it. Like, we have to destroy them. We have to dox no more puff pieces about Richard Spencer. We want to dox like average supporters and stuff like that. They went hard. And then they jumped off the bandwagon, and then they're like, "Oh, we're not alt-right. We're not about race, and we're not, And it just became vague and just kind of stupid. And I think the culmination of that, and I don't even know anything that they've done since, was like getting Lauren Southern. They're on a ski slope where migrants, reportedly were passing by, and they're out there like blocking them, but they're not blocking anyone. It's not a confrontation. It really is fake activism. I mean, I don't know another way to put it. I mean, you could call it theater. Maybe that's a little euphemistic.
Well,
just
I
fake,
actually,
basically. And you're getting these American, e-girls to come look at it. And then they're like, oh, yeah, we don't like racism, but, it's Austrian, ethno-nationalism. Oh, France. I want French culture to continue so that I can go travel to France and, visit bistros and, go visit Notre Dame or something. It was just all just fake. And I don't know. I think I wasn't the only one who saw through it. I don't know what they're doing now. But I kind of get it that you can, unlike in the United States, where there is a First Amendment and a tradition of, accepting bold speech within limits, They don't have that in Europe. So I kind of understand the confinement, the limits that they have to operate under. But I also think that just kind of hit a wall. And you saw this with when Americans, particularly post Charlottesville, when like Identity Europa was aping identitarians, and they're just kind of doing the same thing. But you get to the point with activism where it is like, what are you doing? Like, what is the point of this? And a non-rhetorical question. I mean, IE would go and like put a sticker of IE and then some vague statement about reclaiming America or whatever. And it seems like Patriot Front kind of did that as well. And the question is, it's, I understand limiting your risk, but there are going to be risk doing anything. And we saw that, last weekend in Philadelphia. Sorry for this dog squeaking.
No, it's okay. It's okay. I guess what Patriot Front encountered was a bunch of people who were trying to assault them or like get them into some kind of like physical confrontation. And one thing I did like was that they did not engage, that they didn't go as far as to try and punch back and hit them, because I feel like everybody wants that. But it's not necessary, because the moment they do that, well, what happens? They just get, violent domestic terrorists attack civilians in Philadelphia. Okay,
exactly. But it's a catch-22 because
then it makes
media it makes them look weak, and the media reports that I read were and again, this is mainstream reports. I'm sure it's a different report on Telegram or on alt-right Twitter or whatever, but this is the mainstream report that gets viewed by hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of people. And it's that they ran away. The people from the neighborhood confronted them and they dove into their moving van. So it's a catch-22. I actually understand the predicament they're in, and I'm not trying to pile on. They're in a predicament where if they fight back, they are going to be treated as maniacs or even terrorists. If they don't fight back, they're going to be demeaned as wimps. It's a real catch-22. So this brings us back to the question, what are you doing? Because nothing is low risk. And the second you start to catch on and the media is like, let's start covering this, we need a boogeyman or whatever, is the second they start engaging with you in a way that they want to destroy you. And so if you're going to engage in this at all, you have to ask, like, what are we doing? And I think, something like IE was just this kind of incestuous thing where it was like, what are they trying to do? We're trying to get people to join IE to do actions, to put them on social media so that people will join IE, will do like
it felt like Identity Europa,
totally fake.
Yeah, I felt like Identity Europa was also grifting like on the success of groups like American Vanguard and Atomwaffen at the time, because they really popped up when they were supposed to be like this like the optics version of both of those organizations.
Well, like on Twitter,
I think they were grifting off me. I mean, to be honest.
Okay, yeah,
so,
they were.
I mean. Sorry,
then it was like, but we're optics. We're gonna win over normal conservatives and whatever. And yeah, where are they now?
We have aesthetic.
Yeah, there's a couple things I do want to say real quick. So like on Twitter, kind of like what you were saying right there. I remember like when the optics stuff was going on, the people who were like anti-optics, they would bring you up and they would basically, it was either you're a Fed or you're terrible optics or like you're a Nazi LARPer. Then they would bring up Peinbach, the Cuckbox, Marxist-Leninist guy now, or they would bring up Atomwaffen, because I remember specifically Iron March were always on there arguing with them about how you're optics cuck. Then they would bash you for being an optics cuck too, and Fuentes, which was kind of funny because you guys are very
I would
different.
get bashed as being the optics cuck, like before the optics debate. That was one of the ways that I was bashed. And then I got associated with, people who I don't really have much of a connection to. And it's just all weird movement drama. And it's what I've noticed with the movement is that they'll get on like memes. And I think we should use that word, like in the way that Richard Dawkins used the word meme of what?
I'm guilty of the whole meme stuff. Pretty
well,
bad.
I'm not talking about just like funny photos that you post. Like I mean a meme. Yeah, a meme in the sense of like it's like a gene. It's there to reproduce itself. And they get on a new meme or collection of memes every 3 to 6 months. And whether it's optics, whether it's white Sharia, whether it's no e-girls, whether it's Yang Gang, whether or hot stuff, anti-Spencer stuff, or whether it's what is the latest one. I mean, they just kind of shift, and there's like a tipping point that's reached in the Borg like apparatus that is these forums or wherever they are. And there are people who are there's some people who are sensitive to this, and they understand what the community wants. And then there are entertainers who entertain the community. So they take on the latest strategy, they take on the latest talking points, etc. And then there are other people who are more advanced who know how to manipulate these things. And those are actually few and far between. I don't think, say, Nicholas Fuentes quite knows how to manipulate. I think he's an entertainer. He preaches to the choir. And he's very good at that. And I think he's become a kind of like incarnation of anonymous, alt-right or dissident right graper. He represents them in a very deep and real way. But there are other people who act behind the scenes that I think are actually manipulating the meme and actually like proactively shifting things. And those people are all entirely malign. So I've just gotten to the point where I don't really want to have anything to do with it, and I'll talk about it, and I can't like quite divorce myself from it, because they won't leave me alone in a way. Like if I tweet out anything, I'll kind of get a sense of where they're going. But I think it's the challenge is to stay principled and consistent on one hand, or evolve, like genuinely evolve your position, and try to change the ultimate message. But in the sense of like just going with the flow and like listening to the horde, it's a fool's errand. It's grifting. At the end of the day, it is grifting, because you are just entertaining this group of people, and you are not actually like influencing society or something. You are not actually developing ideas. You're simply, again, preaching to the choir. And I think maybe it's my age, maybe it's my own temperament, maybe I can remember a different time when there wasn't this movement. But my view is just, I don't care about them. I just don't, to be honest. And I kind of find it funny when they troll me, and I weirdly like a lot of the anti-Spencer hate, which is about burgers and being a federal agent and all this kind of stuff. Yeah,
kind of reminds me of a Mussolini quote: "They love me because they hate me."
Yeah,
but there's two things I can think about actually on this. One of them was actually on kind of like where you're bringing up a generation identity, where they basically rebranded and started saying they weren't all right. I remember like when Identity Rope Up got rid of that Mosley guy, and then it went over with Casey. They basically rebranded and dropped a lot of the white nationalism or like racial identity for like an American, like broader nationalism that was basically tailored to like the MAGA movement, and then it was brought in with America First. And part of when they did that too, it actually had a lot of online drama and antagonism that they were starting against Patriot Front, because a lot of the propaganda and stuff they were doing was actually straight up stolen from Patriot Front, or at least it looked heavily inspired. And people noticed that, and then Fuentes basically saying these are just idiots that go around putting posters, doing flash demonstrations, and that's basically what AIM was doing at the time.
It was a description of AIM. And then also, I remember I actually listened to. I did a podcast on this, but it's 6 months now. But I listened to Patrick Casey's discussion of like the Fuentes thing, and he had just kind of come full circle where it's time to like betray a new person. But he was declaring things like, I'm really security conscious, and we don't have any doxing or whatever. Like, no group has like doxed more people than AIM. I mean, to my knowledge, it was just one doxing of the membership after another. And again, they're trying to get more membership and they claim they vet them or whatever, but you just can't, those are contradictory things. You're growing your membership, you're trying to get the spotlight on you, and you're sustained by people paying. So it's not going to work. You're going to be infiltrated, and they were infiltrated like no other thing I'd ever seen in my life.
Well, part of too, besides that, I can think of when you were bringing up a lot of the meme culture, because it's basically like dopamine. I can only really compare it to pornography because they're basically changing from many different things nonstop. But you saw it a lot with the rhetoric of Nick, and like I've talked with Cultured Thug about this. He likes the energy, but he doesn't like Nick himself because he does think he's charismatic, which is something that he respects. But his main problem is there actually isn't a coherent ideology behind it. And it's because it is, like you're saying, it's just entertainment, and it's just kind of the meme culture embodied basically. And he's kind of like their speaker for it, which is something I can respect. But at the same time, it's kind of bad. And you see that with some of the incoherence. One I can think of where he says, I'm an American conservative. Then there's other things where he says, I'm a distributist, a Catholic. And then there's been other times where he said, I'm a Catholic fascist. And like, these are all like completely incompatible different terms. There's been times where he said, I'm an ethno-nationalist. And there's been other times where he says, we don't want a racial nationalism. We want like an American nationalism. And it's incoherence and doublethink, and like it may work with idiots that have a cult of personality, and sure, it might work with a mass movement to a degree, but it's not exactly an intellectual or academic idea. It's more of an embodiment of the leftist critique of like just blind right-wing populism. It doesn't have a real
it is an
ideology.
Embodiment of a left-wing critique in the sense that
it's aesthetic fetishization of it.
Yeah, but when the rubber hits the road, it is Trumpism or even Republicanism. It's like, America First people. What are they going to tell us at the end of the day in October of 2022? They're going to tell you to go vote for the Republican Party. What are they going to tell you at the end of the day in October of 2024? Go vote for Trump.
Yeah, it's Finkelstein.
Yeah. But then in between, we'll do a little touch of Holocaust denial. We'll do a little racism. We'll do a little anti-woman stuff, whatever. But it's like that is a kind of left-wing parody of the right, where they basically claim that all Republicans are kind of like secret Nazis. And they are in this way. I, again, really attempted and failed at in creating a totally independent thing. Like we are absolutely willing to dump Trump. Like, no question. We have a totally different worldview from conservatism. We don't have much in common with them. We might have more in common with the left on just basic issues. That is always what I agree. Promoted. And that is too much. Like, it's much better to own the libs, effectively act like a conservative, be on that team, Republicanism and conservatism, it is ultimately a multi-level marketing industry. And, what you do with multi-level marketing is you create a down channel, but it's all flowing upward to a thing. So let's say you're doing doTERRA, which is essential oils. biblically based essential oils. you all of the money is ultimately going to a corporation that is making these things and distributing them. But you can create a down channel. Let's say you have a lot of friends, you're popular, you're charismatic. You can create a down channel where they come to you for their doTERRA, but money still goes up. And America First, whether it's, Pedro Gonzalez or Nick Fuentes or the more mainstream stuff or whatever, it's all part of that it's a down channel basically in a multi-level marketing thing. So I mean, you could see this in 2020 with the Stop the Steal stuff. Nick, I think, was vital to that operation, maybe even indispensable. He was there very early on, and there is no doubt that a percentage, not a small one, of that, what was it, 20 million or whatever Trump raised after losing the election, was kind of funneled in that direction through Nick, and he got a piece of it as well. So but it all operates in that kind of octopus-like structure, which is the multi-level marketing system. So you can't ultimately go against Trump. You can say, I hate the GOP. That's actually not a new thing. For the last 30 or 40 years, you've had, grassroots right wingers talking about how much they hate rhinos.
Well, it's been a thing since John McCain. Buckley kind of created modern conservatism as we know it, really.
Yeah, it was definitely a thing early on in National Review. The National Review kind of got on board with the GOP, and then it was a thing with the New Right in the early 80s. It was certainly, I remember when Mitt Romney was winning the nomination, when John McCain was getting the nomination in 2008, you had this kind of grassroots revolt.
Yeah, the libertarian stuff. I remember seeing you speaking at Ron Paul. Stuff. You're pretty young looking back then.
Yeah, but it's all, well, I don't know if that's an insult or a compliment, but
no, you actually aged pretty well.
Thanks. It's all still flowing to the beast, whether it's the GOP or Trump. I mean, Trump has kind of created something that can kind of sort of be antagonistic towards the GOP when it wants to. But America First and Fuentes, they're part of that multi-level marketing structure, and that's how they function. Now, if you want to get out of that, heaven help you, because that really means that you are on your own. You are entering the arena alone, and that is going to be a lot more difficult. But you have to be willing to say no to it at the very least if you want to accomplish that. You just have to be willing to say, no, stop sending your money to Trump. Stop voting. Stop thinking that this is an important election because we've got to stop the radical libs. Stop thinking like that. If you say that, you are fucking with the MLM, and it just can't be tolerated, and it's very difficult to make such a thing work.
So there's a couple things I can think of off the top of my head actually on this. Besides that stuff with Trump, what kind of surprised me is how these people just kind of doubled down, and you had some cases of this, I think it was a type of embezzlement that kind of went on. I could be using the word wrong, but basically they had these people who paid to Stop the Steal, and without their consent, it was basically put on a recurring deduction. So you basically had some people in some cases having $10,000 taken out of their bank account without their consent, and nothing really came of it in a reaction. Then even when it came to the organization, one of the things I was saying when they were going to do it was on Telegram is that this is basically going to be a trap like Charlottesville. I went to Charlottesville myself, but it basically ended up being a trap with the city, which I'm pretty sure you can agree with because of the whole huge legal battle that came out of it. That's going on right now.
I mean, a totally annoying legal battle. I mean, it's not that I never faced any criminal.
Well, the mission of it's to bleed all your money out. I believe.
Yeah, that's and just annoy the hell out of you. Yeah, but Charlottesville was an interesting case in the sense that before anything happened, I mean, before there was any violence, there was just kind of low level violence going on. People pushing and shoving, maybe, but nothing real big.
Yeah.
state of emergency was declared, and then we were pushed out of the park, and then chaos reigned on Market Street and in downtown Charlottesville. I mean, it was a total disaster. If you want to call it a trap, you can. I mean, that's a reasonable assessment of it. I didn't warn anyone not to go to January 6th because I just thought it was another like bullshit thing. Like, I just thought it was going to be another like idiot fest.
Oh, basically. I was saying it was going to be like another Charlottesville, but this is going to be like the defining myth. That's what I was saying. And I basically compared it to like a failed March on Rome, basically.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, it's so weird because, you know, there are a lot of people who want to downplay it, and I kind of understand why they're downplaying it. You know, it was just it was silly and it was buffoonish and it had no chance of succeeding. Of course, that's correct. At the same time, I mean, there was an interesting documentary that came out by the New York Times last weekend or the weekend before that was basically made out of found footage from these live streamers. So this was not done by journalists. It was not done by the content was not from the Times outside of the narration. It was done by the people who were involved in it themselves. And the amount of talk that was occurring beforehand about we're going into the Capitol, the amount of people declaring themselves revolutionaries, the amount of people who genuinely thought they had succeeded. There are just footage of people walking to the Capitol saying they can't put Biden in now. And they've heard the American public. And I think Donald Trump clearly had a calculus. With Trump, it's difficult to say exactly what he's thinking because his speech is so, muddled and just crazy.
Abstract.
Yeah. But I mean, you can reasonably say that he wanted to walk down Pennsylvania Avenue arm in arm with these protesters, which this is explicitly what he said. They were going to make a huge amount of noise. And then all these Republicans were going to realize that, oh, Trump's the party now. I've got to just negate these results. I mean, whether this was even possible is dubious, but I think that was the calculus. I mean, I think it was an attempt at stopping the election being certified. I mean, it was. Now, it turned into a buffoonish shit show, and I think there are a lot of liberals who are kind of getting out of hand. You know, like there was a Lincoln, Lincoln Party or Lincoln Gay thing. That,
the Lincoln Project you're talking about.
The Lincoln internship, yes. They were basically saying like this is worse than 9/11 and it's going to lead to more deaths. They were saying stuff that was just nuts, and I don't even know what they were implying by that. I mean, like, what? We're going to kill everyone who was there or something? I mean, there are people obviously who have gotten out of hand and are over inflating it, but at the same time, you can't underinflate it. I mean, they genuinely thought that. Now, Charlottesville, I don't know of anyone who said something like, we're going to take over the government or whatever. Maybe they said they won't remove the statue now. Maybe that's the level of, bombast that was there. But I don't even hear that, to be honest. It was a permitted protest in kind of big alt-right jamboree. Now, January 6th was of a different kind. It really was an attempt at a change of government. I mean, it just was.
Well, there's a couple things I brought up during a rant on this, and I told you before that they got flagged off by Groypers, and they kept talking about how to graphic tee during the rant, but it's whatever.
Yeah.
But I brought up how there was video recordings. I've seen the recordings, and it was Fuentes saying, take the Capitol. We are going to occupy the Capitol. He's basically giving a speech telling people to go into it and do it. And then he's saying attack. He literally says attack the cops in the recording. And now, as far as I know, when it comes to any organizing that I have done or anybody else has done, they've never done that. He's the only person I've ever seen do that. And there was other people there saying heads on a pike, at Ali Akbar saying victory or death. And in a court, that can be framed as an incitement to violence or incitement to riot. Now, there's many cases of them doing this, and it doesn't have any legality, like with Rise Above movement, for example. But in this case, there is proof, like actual proof. And now, like in a broader sense, like I have sympathy for like the nationalist like idea, but at the same time, like there's really no way you can really defend that at all. No. And what I think is weird about it is how Fuentes hasn't been arrested over the whole thing. There hasn't been any crackdown on him. And there was something else I noticed is how during Charlottesville, their whole hyper focus was on Heimbach, NSM, then the swastika flag guy and bad optics and accusing you of it. When at their rally that they did, or siege, whatever you want to call it, it was stupid. They had a dude with a white power flag in the Congress building. They had a guy with the Auschwitz shirt. They had a bunch of fat, ugly boomers that look out of shape. Like it was probably more unoptical than anything I've ever seen out of Charlottesville.
They had an optics flag, like they had the America First flag in the congressional chamber. I mean, I think that it was kind of like a new version. I mean, I agree that the dude with the swastika flag was a problem, at Charlottesville, and there you can conspiracy theorize about that was a Fed, or
I don't want to call any of them
maybe
that,
he wasn't.
Yeah.
Maybe he wasn't. Maybe he was just an idiot. That's actually plausible, but who cares? I don't think we're ever going to know. Yeah, there are a lot of idiots, and another big problem, but I don't think we even need to discuss that because it's just there. But yeah, the optics flag within the chamber is almost worse. I mean, my favorite personage from this, who I think was denounced by Fuentes, was this chick named Riley. And
the siege mask girl.
Yeah. So,
oh my goodness.
So she... No, I was accused of having a crush on Riley, but that's not true. But I was just kind of fascinated by her because she was so like representative of like post alt-right, basically. And it was so she was just some girl, and I'm sure she was like a forum lurker. And she has actually, you can be genuinely sympathetic towards her. She is a child of divorce and doesn't really have a ton of prospects going right now. I mean, I have sympathy, and I think that's actually, she's like a lot of people. So maybe that led to some of the issues, but she wanted to be, I'm sure she was a hero on the forums because she was not a, man, basically, and actually, verified female. And
there was a
then
lot of
she like
for going on.
Oh, no question. I don't doubt it. But she went into the office, and again, it's all very murky. I don't know exactly what happened. Her ex-boyfriend claimed that she tried to sell Nancy Pelosi's laptop to the Russians, and that people have brought doubt into that. I don't know.
That would be very funny if that was the case.
Yeah, I mean, and just totally absurd. You steal someone's what are the nuclear codes are on there? No, it's probably like, I don't know. Maybe it'd be Hunter Biden style laptop of Nancy Pelosi shenanigans,
pictures.
Yeah, exactly. But it would probably be lame. Maybe you'd find out who Nancy Pelosi's boyfriend is. Like, who cares? Just all meeting. I mean, I don't give a shit about the Hunter Biden stuff. I mean, I find it funny, but who cares? But anyway, she does this like hero stuff, and then they locate a video that she made that was a like anti-Wignat video of her like wearing a siege mask and doing stuff. And her lawyer was telling the media, no, hold on. It was all ironic. Like, we were making fun of white supremacists to show how optically aware we are and how normal we are.
Yeah, meme culture doesn't work IRL, guys.
It just doesn't work. The irony was lost on everyone who saw that video. Let's just say it that way. And so she kind of became the worst, the thing that she was demeaning, she just became. And for her, who she doesn't have, I don't know, like there are ways that you could survive bad press, but I don't think she can. She doesn't exist outside of the forum. Like, the forum is her medium. And she's been denounced or whatever. I genuinely feel sorry for her. I find her a kind of crazy character from that time. But it just, again, it doesn't work. Now, in terms of the free speech stuff, there are a few major Supreme Court cases. The Phelps case, which was I believe was a civil suit that went up to the Supreme Court, where Phelps was saying, holding up signs saying God hates fags to a military funeral. He lost a civil case where they basically got money from him that I doubt he ever paid or his church ever paid. That got pushed up to the Supreme Court, and they basically said it was written. I think might have been unanimous, or Alito didn't vote for it. But the Chief Justice Roberts wrote the opinion. He was like, "Look, this is terrible speech. No, this is totally out of bounds. But you cannot." You do not deserve a settlement because someone is a complete jerk. So that's a precedent. Brandenburg's a more famous precedent where he basically said some stuff like, we're going to kick out the blacks, or he said something like that. It was actually fairly vague. And he said something like, we're going to march on Washington and kick out the blacks, something like that. It was ultimately vague. It was deemed tough talk, and it is free speech. Now, you cannot order someone to invade the Capitol to stop the functioning of government. You can't do that. You can't order someone to go and stop the functioning of the post office. I mean, that is a federal crime. So what will ultimately happen? I mean, what that video of Nick saying, we've taken the Capitol, maybe you could argue that he was so far away that it was just kind of tough talk.
Well, he said attack the cops too.
Yeah, that strikes me as like clearly over the line. Whereas the guy with the Auschwitz sweatshirt or whatever, that is not over the line. That is just free speech. Now, he might very well be arrested for other things. But
I only brought it up because they kept bringing up swastika flag guy. It's basically the same thing, really, in my view.
Worse.
But yeah.
It's like they always point at people who choose not to participate in the voting and the supporting of Trump as always the problem people. Like, we're the problem because we don't support them.
Right.
Well, it's just
I'm a Fed because I'm telling you not to vote for Republicans. I mean, are they?
America First just wants to make a lot of these dissidents into another just voting block.
Well, the whole don't vote. Like, I didn't vote at all in the election, but my view was if somebody was going to vote, this is probably going to be unpopular. You probably should vote a left ticket because regardless, the economic policies are going to be better than the laissez-faire extremism. And these people,
which benefits no one.
Well, even though Democrats, they have better optics, or when it comes to cultural social issues, because that's what's inculcated basically in broader institutions or soft power institutions. So they kind of get away with it, but behind the scenes, they deport more people than the Republicans, and they also crack down on rioters more. Biden was doing actual policies that were cracking down on Antifa people just as much as it's cracking down on people like me or like Fuentes.
Yeah. I mean, they will deport more people than the Republicans. I predicted this years ago. I stand by it. They will do it. They are not defunding the police. You can see that in certain local areas of Portland and Minneapolis and so on. That's clearly not happening in New York City. That's not happening nationally. They're doing the opposite. They are just more competent. I mean, I'm sorry. And I don't see any reason not to vote for them. They represent the institutionalization of woke ideology. That is correct. Well, that is the dominant ideology in every institution.
It's kind of like what you were bringing up with
to the police department.
It's kind of
you're not fighting it. Republicans, all of this stuff got so much worse under Trump. The transsexual issue just blew up. the we went from the time of Dylan Roof, who was
stand with Caitlyn Jenner.
Oh yeah, the Caitlyn, right? The Caitlyn Jenner stuff. Yeah, it just all of it just got so much worse under Trump. There is clearly no actual counter revolution coming from the GOP. They are just losing over and over. So they don't support it until they have to 5 years later. Same with everything. Same with civil rights. Same with same with they turned against the Vietnam War after basically kicking out all the alt-right of the age, the Birch Society, over not supporting the Vietnam War. They'll always take the mainstream opinion 5 to 10 years later. But they offer no real opposition. They just lose, and they will lose. And even, I've seen some of them get into this tough talk type, mode. Like JD Vance, who's this, kind of interesting character is now like, well, the left wants to use power and the right doesn't want to use power and whatever. Well, that's not exactly true. The right will use power when it comes to, appointing a constitutionalist to the Supreme Court. They'll do that in a totally, underhanded quasi. Anything for Israel, anything for, at least back in the W days, anything for a new war. They are ruthless when it comes to the things that they actually care about. And they will do things that are illegitimate. The Trump tax cuts were viewed as illegitimate. They were unpopular. The Comey Barrett thing was just really unpopular. It was, if you want to maintain a kind of broad center, that's not the kind of thing that you do, particularly after the Scalia and Gorsuch, I guess, thing. So they do all this stuff ruthlessly. They will use power when it's something they care about. The question that I would ask, like JD Vance or Tucker or all these people, is what do you actually want? Like they seem to, like, Tucker seems to talk about how we all were taught that MLK is good and that this is America and we don't judge people by the color of their skin. Like, it's all this like liberalism from 40 years ago that he asserts, and he kind of, concern trolls the left of like, well, do you not believe in this anymore? It's all
reactionary.
Reactionary. It's rhetorical, and it's just kind of smug or something. There's just something about it that I loathe. It's like, why don't you go and criticize the 64 Civil Rights Act? Why don't you go and criticize MLK, as opposed to, embracing those things and complaining that the left doesn't stand up to its own values? It's this right-wing attempt to be like Alinskyeites and hold them to account to their own talking points. It's just, it doesn't work.
They're actually doing the same tactics where they're basically trying to deplatform specific people who are left wing because they say a quote unquote something that's a bit too anti-Semitic, or they do something that targets people themselves, or they even target people like you, for example. And it's just their way of doing deplatforming. Like I said, like Gripper Generals, they target specific people who talk about Fuentes, and their strategy is basically to just talk shit, for lack of better words.
Yeah. Yeah. So it just, it doesn't work. So it's like, why not just like, we're not going to win those battles, so why fight them? And why not try to build up something that can actually change this thing? And I've just reached the conclusion that, I reached the conclusion that the GOP was useless long ago, but I've just kind of reached the conclusion that trying to like manage this online anonymous movement is impossible and undesirable. And that just is what it is. I don't know what to say. It doesn't actually lead anywhere. And I want to do my own thing, which is going to be smaller and different. And I kind of built up a, notoriety for myself that I don't think I'll ever be, I'll ever vanish from the scene. Yeah. But you have to put energy somewhere. And if you're just preaching the choir or grifting, or if you're the, army for the GOP, you're serving other people basically. And I just don't want to do it.
Well, like personally, like I didn't vote at all because like I can understand voting for like the left ticket because there's a possibility like they can be pulled a certain way better, much more so than like Republicans because they have a stronger, I would say like left streak. But I see as many problems with anything that's really involving like institutional movement-based politics as much as I have problems with anything that is quote unquote sieged here. Like I have as many problems with both because I kind of see them as dead ends as much as I see social movements generally as a dead end, unless it's like something like it's thoroughly academic that you're doing. Which I think you're a pretty academic person myself, but including Ed Dutt and some of those other guys. But I know there's like a similar analysis from Marxist Leninists on online too, because like I've debated and had conversations with some of them, and like their view is that the Democrat Party is kind of like working how we vision the Conservative Party. And they're basically telling people not to vote, and they're trying to appeal to writer like conservatives that are like interested who are kind of like more into Dugin and stuff to try and create like a new multipolarity movement that will overtake the current establishment.
Right.
You probably haven't heard a lot about it, but the only reason why I know about it is, like I said, I was debating or talking with these people. But it is kind of interesting that they're kind of reaching similar conclusions that you are.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I would have a different view on this whole thing than multipolarity, but that is the Dugin view. I have a different stance on this.
Oh yeah, but I had a guy on that talked about that.
Fine in a way. Yeah,
like I talked with Billy Corn Pop and some of the Hispanic supremacist dudes about that, and also Zero Schizo, because like I do find it as like a very fascinating concept, and you do see people like Caleb Maupin kind of push it too. And I do think there's something broader there that can probably be worked with more effectively than what's currently going on. But the problem is trying to get that type of intellectual backing. And like I've had some spats over this with people too, is that any movement, like no matter what it is, it has to have an academic or intellectual motivation for an emphasis on ideology to understand negation. So there needs to have an understanding of a friend and enemy to bring it into real life politics for praxis. And you don't see that in the right. You do see it brought up.
You do see it in the left. I mean, Bowden would talk about this. He would say, I mean, because there are these interesting questions of like, left and right and kind of asymmetry between the two. And I could talk more about that. But one thing that Bowden would bring up was that the left has a radical core that radiates outward, and it ultimately reaches Elizabeth Warren. It's slow, and they probably maybe never quite get it, but they kind of do get it. They are influenced by it. So you have radical ideas that are pushed forward at, say, universities or among independent researchers and thinkers, and they have a tendency to kind of trickle outward, to emanate outward, and ultimately affect policy. And we could go through, which is obvious.
Richard Wolff, I can think of off the top of my head, because he's like an academic. It's really big on Marxist economics, and he does kind of
like old school though.
Yeah, he is, but he does talk with like some mainstream people like Paul Krugman, for example, and they kind of share ideas and stuff.
They don't do they cancel him or talk about how, oh well, we need to get rid of our Richard Wolffs, but the right has them too. So let's be fair here. Let's cut out the extremists. No, they have them on their podcast. When have I been invited on the National Review podcast? Never will.
Well, CNN meme.
Well, right. I mean, look, that's why I talk to the liberal media. If I'm going to be your boogeyman, but you actually fairly represent what I say within reason, I get it, what they're going to do. But if you can get ideas out there, it's worth it. And again, that whole CNN thing from 2019, it's been 2 years now. People are still freaked out about it. But like, what was the issue? It's that I went on there and I said, Trump throws out red meat. that's like your, drunk uncle live tweeting Hannity. I mean, I think that was the line.
Anti-China, like anti-Asian crap, or like
and he was talking about Baltimore, Mexican. Being like, oh, there are rats all over Baltimore. Like all of this is just meaningless junk food. And you gotta resist it and move on. Why the left hated it? Because they're like, Richard's saying kind of what we say. You're making him look good. And then the right was like, traitor. He again, this is why I'm so unpopular.
Well, I mean, we're really not right.
That's what you have to do. Because you're not going to get on the National Review podcast. I don't even know if they have a podcast, but you're not going to get on it. And so you have to find a way, and it doesn't always work. Believe me, I know it doesn't always work, but it can work. And that's the only way to do it. If you're talking to your fans, you are ultimately just entertaining them. And you're just talking to no one. And you think that you're relevant and you're moving forward because you're getting reinforcements. It doesn't. I mean, there's something to be said for that. I talk to my supporters too. We have long conversations. We had a great one last night. I get some new ideas. It's reviving, but that's ultimately not what you want. That doesn't lead anywhere. And so, but anyway, to go back to Bowden, so it's like the left has an ideological core, maybe even a perverse ideological core, in the sense of like, let's say if you're in the 1980s, we're going to promote gay marriage. We're going to promote transsexuality. You would just be laughed out of any room saying that kind of stuff. Now it's mainstream. Now it's taken for granted. Now the conservatives agree with it because it emanated outward. Now the right doesn't have that
critical
core.
Theory.
Right, critical theory, all of it. The right doesn't have that core. It lacks, it's an empty center. So you have all of these people trying to appeal to normies and rejecting the right. And if anything, the kind of like, ideological hardcore, maybe even perverse ideological hardcore, like energizes the left. Like radical ideas put forth by me or other people, like that almost, if we're we are energizing people who have ears to hear it, of course, but we're almost energizing the left on some level. And it just doesn't work. The right will never progress unless it gets to a point where it can accept that. And now it's a donut. And the left is a kind of layered onion, you could say. It has a core, and then there are layers outside of it. That's functional. That is progressive in the real sense of the word.
One thing I can also notice,
has no center.
One thing I can notice is when it comes to the American left, is the American left seems to take more of like a influence from like Marcuse, and Marcuse, of course, gets his ideas from Gramsci, who gets his ideas of critical theory from Gentile, the fascist intellectual, which is actually where it comes from. But a lot of people don't know that. But Marcuse was directly propped up by like the CIA and like the American government to basically gut out the Marxist element of the American left, and it shifted it more towards like a liberal social democracy mindset, which is what you have with the modern left. And you kind of see that with people like Sanders or Chomsky and a lot of them, and they basically attack like actual Marxist ideology. But what I find interesting is that a lot of Marxists nowadays, they know that, like actual orthodox ideological Marxist, and they, instead of like adopted Dugin into their understanding. So you end up with people like Pedro Casilla, I believe, from Peru. He ran as a open communist, but he was anti-LGBT. He was for closed borders, nationalism, anti-transgenderism, stuff like that. And he got elected into office running on that. And that's kind of like what they're wanting to do. And in a way, it kind of reminds me like when you were talking about a nationalism with a socialist streak during a conversation a long time ago. I don't remember where exactly.
Yeah.
And it kind of it brings up the idea of like the third position that Culture Thug talks about, a socialism and a nationalism married together. And what I think's weird is that when you try reaching out to these same people talking about this, or at least doing that, they kind of distance themselves at the same time from people like me or like other people with similar ideas to them. But like in a way, I feel like Dugin is actually right that it's basically going to be a synthesis between that against the liberal order, which is basically what America or Atlanticist civilization basically is.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I understand all of that, and I have a lot of sympathies towards that. I guess I have kind of taken a slightly different position on this.
So
but I
you
would
still
like
believe
to
in a
be in
post-America?
dialogue. I think post-America is, I don't think we know what that is going to be yet. And I don't think we are fully honest about how chaotic and violent and disintegrating that is going to be. And I think there's always been in these circles a bit, whether it's Ron Paul or Dugin or whatever, there's been a kind of happy talk about multipolarity, and that, oh, we'll just go to this new world system where we'll have nation states that trade and with each other and don't fight and so on.
Well, that isn't what
I
I'm
don't
saying.
see that as a future possibility.
Yeah,
I think there will be one polar. I think unipolarity isn't just an American thing that happened post Cold War. I think unipolarity was a historical moment involving technology and communications that I don't think is going to go away. Now, there very well might be breakdowns. Like, I don't think the American empire is long for this world. I genuinely believe that within our lifetimes, we will see it break down. And it's certainly losing legitimacy. However, I don't think that it's going to result in multipolarity, at least for the long term. I think that might be a short term.
No, I do agree.
There always is going to be a big kahuna dominating the planet, offering a system that would be a financial system. And who is going to do that is the question.
Well, I believe you can actually see that in geopolitics by Dugin, because like, and then he brings up multipolarity. Geopolitics itself is actually about Russian civilization supremacy, which is why it talks about the Eurasian Union and all that. So I believe multipolarity is more of a strategy to tear apart America and then have Russia take its place, basically. And like, it's not a bad thing. It's just the nature of power and centralization, in my view. And like, you can see kind of like what you're saying with that. You can actually see these elements of this actually kind of explained in generative anthropology through negation to the out group, where they focus on the out. And you can also see it in Schmidt, Hobbes, Machiavelli, and a lot of their political analysis. And you can even see it with chimpanzees, with the Gombe chimpanzee war, which a lot of people don't know about. They basically observed in primates, they will exterminate entire other groups of chimps over resources, territory, and even the females, which is something that you see in prehistoric or tribal warfare. And they even engage in similar tactics of isolation and kidnapping.
Yeah. Well, kind of the rape of the Sabine women, you could say. Foundational event of the Roman Empire. Let's get the girls. I don't doubt that. I think that's a fascinating concept. If you might, even after the show, you might want to just send me some links to either books or articles.
I'm working on a huge video I'm going to be doing on it. So like I could send you the link, because like I have all the citations in it, so you can just kind of look through.
Yeah, no, I would definitely be interested in that. But I can see where you're going with this, certainly with like Machiavelli and Schmidt and so on, in terms of recognizing the enemy and in different two different kind of versions of the enemy as well. Someone who's confronted and someone who is negated. But yeah, I don't. I mean, I hate to bring a tear to Dugin's eye. I don't see Russia dominating the world anytime.
Well, they're equivalent to Italy, really, like an economic power. All they have is military power and contracts.
They have a economy that is smaller than Italy's. But the difference is, of course, is that they have this legacy of the Cold War and a legacy of the Russian Empire. So they've got nukes. they have a concept of themselves, which Italy can have at some point. I don't think it has it now. They have a kind of concept of themselves as bigger, and they are pushing back against the establishment. They are kind of trolling the Atlanticists.
I think China is actually more is more the inheritor, because economically they've surpassed the United States. Militarily, they're supposed to be surpassing very soon, and that, like, if Russia would align with China, they would be the subordinate partner, because China's mission is the Belt and Road idea, which will make China the center of civilization, which kind of reaches back to the Qing identity, where they consider themselves as the pinnacle of all civilization. They consider themselves superior to the Roman civilization, which is something a lot of people don't even know about, really, which is, you can see it with how they interact with foreign powers too.
Yes. No, I think that this is something I also need to kind of read about. There's an interesting book. I was actually just looking at my shopping cart here. There's an interesting book on the Belt and Road concept as like a new paradigm that is genuinely different than the Americanist version. I agree with that. And I think that's an interesting conversation to be had.
This is interesting too.
Research myself.
There's actually a guy who was involved in the Bush administration, or they talked about how they went in and got rid of Saddam. I posted it on Telegram. I could download the video and probably send it to you, but he said part of the reason why they went in there wasn't over like Israel or Saddam himself. It was actually so they could disrupt the Chinese expansion through Belt and Road, and they could also have direct links with the CIA going and working with the Uyghurs, which are the Muslims, to stir up problems and to undermine the Chinese, which is something that's been going on, which is part of the reason why China has been expanding into India over border disputes, because the CIA has been pushing through there.
Interesting. Yeah, the book was this Bruno Macias. Have you heard about him? He has a book called Belt and Road. It was something that I was kind of meaning to read. It was on my list.
I haven't heard about it.
He's a mainstream person. I just kind of wanted to get
because I've been going through A. James Gregor on China, fascism and Marxism, the long march of China, and I'm going to be going through one called What Chinese Leaders Actually Think. And I actually believe that China may ideologically say it's Marxist-Leninist, sure, but economically it's adopted corporatism, and I believe they're closer to like my ideology, which I would say is fascism. Like, you don't necessarily need to agree with it, but and part of that is that fascism.
Michael Ledeen said as much.
Yeah,
back in the neocon day, the heyday of the Bush era, Michael Ledeen had a famous article saying.
Well, they called it Leninist corporatism too, and another one called "Why You Must Confront China." But corporatism really is like it has a lot of similarities with Lenin's new economic policy, and it's a productive, utilitarian form of socialism that will always adapt to circumstance and social ends. And that's part of my problem with Marxist-Leninists, is because they kind of do mental gymnastics, because Marx is very specific about what socialism is. It's basically like a libertarian state. It's not an anarchist state, and it has absence of commodity production, wages, the value form. And you don't see that in Marxist-Leninist states. They end up adopting corporatism eventually, like China has, or they fully liberalize and they collapse. Like Poland, they completely liberalized all their agriculture. And I think that's part of the necessity for stability. And they have to do that to formalize and adapt to reality. And I just think that's probably the flaw of their ideology, but I don't really want to talk entirely about Marxists, because I find them boring just as much as I find conservatives boring.
Yeah.
This would probably be an interesting thing to bring up. So this has been kind of going around like recently. The Twitter ban of Fuentes. Is there anything you want to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, first off, again, just conservatives are useless. I mean, you actually can solve this problem. And, I would like them to. And you're not going to solve it with any of the memes that they talk about. 230, Section 230, the Communications Act, Communications and Decency Act, or whatever. None of that solves the real problem. And solving it by creating a new little ghetto like Gab or Getter or whatever obviously does not solve the problem. The problem arises from the fact that the social media is increasingly replacing the mainstream media or merging with it. And increasingly the mainstream media is following social media. So we've experienced that certainly within our lifetimes, this change. And also social media becomes a kind of public square that it is the heartbeat of the internet. The internet is not a bunch of individual computers with websites talking to each other. The internet is platforms in this way. And there's also been this issue that has been recognized since 2016 of, what I was talking about, manipulating the troll army. Basically, what is actual disinformation, things that are clearly wrong, and an ability to kind of channel large groups of very online people in certain directions. And they're dealing with this, that it can be dealt with. And the Republicans had a chance to do this. They didn't do it, and they end up with Fuentes and Trump being banned from Twitter. Trump might be back maybe by 2024, who knows? But I do think that it's bad for Fuentes. I don't think it's ever good to leave a platform. Like, I never claimed, when I got kicked off YouTube, I never claimed like, oh, this is actually good or something. Like, I never spun it that way because I don't lie. Like, it's not good. I wish that I were on YouTube. I mean, there it is. I'm not, and I have to deal with that. And Odyssey's great, but it is bad. I do think that he'll be able to maintain his audience because he represents them. He incarnates them.
Well, part of the audience maintaining was attaching himself to Alex Jones, which is something that's been going on recently because Alex maintained a large portion of his population because he already had the online infrastructure in place to do that. And Nick just kind of attached him. So I think it's more of a parasitic relationship going on right there. And he's actually toned down some of his views, but you can kind of tell he's trying to pull them in his direction
in a way. Yeah. Because Alex Jones is not a racist or a racialist, but he is totally wacky in other ways.
Yeah, I'm noticing a lot of
generally the direction Fuentes will go.
Yeah, I'm noticing a lot of Fuentes' followers picking up like a lot of these conspiracy theories that I didn't see them pick up before. Like
one of them, QAnon type stuff.
Yeah, some of them were telling me recently that they don't believe HIV or AIDS is real anymore. I thought that was funny.
Yeah, then they go around too. Like I've seen one of them go around saying that like fascists were like communists. So it's just kind of just made me like look at them. It's like that's like a Dinesh D'Souza moment.
Yeah. I think that's generally the direction he'll go. I think he represents the audience. He like Alex Jones has survived. Now, I think Alex Jones is a lot less relevant than he was. I don't hear as many people talk about Alex Jones because he's been deplatformed from these major things, but he maintains his audience because he represents his audience as well. His audience is a bunch of, kind of crazed, overweight, middle-aged people who are like, he represents them. Yeah. And I think Fuentes is the Zoomer, very online incel type who, wants to be a trad Catholic and say, "Begone, ye thoughts," or whatever. So he represents that. He'll maintain that audience. I think it's less bad for him. But I don't think it's ultimately good. I don't think it's good on any level. I don't think it's good for anyone. And it's ultimately not good for him. And I think it will increasingly become a kind of innerly directed, solipsistic, kind of like disconnected movement.
Yeah. So like this right here would probably be interesting because I've kind of noticed some, it's not really about political analysis per se, but it's more, I've noticed kind of like some of the internet spats over, so Apollonianism, I've noticed like a lot of people have been like contending you over that. Is there like what's your main reasoning for it? Like I haven't looked much into it, but it kind of reminded me kind of, I'm not saying there's an ideological connection, but kind of like Rosenberg's myth of the 20th century, which is kind of like the myth of blood, the worship of blood, basically.
Yeah, I can understand that. I've heard it. It's like it's connected to cosmotheism or whatever. I think it's fine to, look at many of those things. I mean, what I'm doing, I mean, I think that Apolloism will channel almost everything that I do going forward, in the way that, the people you were talking to, a kind of, neo-Marxism or Duginism does channel them. I think Apolloism will channel what I am doing going forward. Now, I have other interests, and obviously someone like Ed is never going to be an Apolloist or whatever. Well, I don't know. Maybe I won't never say never, I guess. But I mean, I have other things that I'm doing. But I think in terms of my own thinking, personally, and then certainly with Mark Brahman's, that's where it's going. And it is, I have recognized the limits of national populism. I've certainly recognized the limits of Trump, and I've recognized the limits of just kind of conservatism and general racism, if you want to talk about it. This notion that, we've got a great thing going here, and if we allow too many more immigrants in, it's going to get ruined. I've recognized the limits of all of those things, and we are charting a new course. And that new course needs an ideological core. And I mean ideological in a maybe a slightly different way than it's used, but an idea system, and that would ultimately express itself in a critique of religions like Judaism and Christianity, but ultimately be something that could be conceived as a religion. It's not a superstitious religion.
So it sounds more like it's kind of like myth, kind of like in a Sorelian sense, because myth is it could be something philosophical, academic, or like irrational that kind of motivates people into something, and it can provide them with a argument of framing to actually have against opposition. That's what it seems more like.
I mean, Apollo is the son of God. I mean, he is Zeus's son, and you could kind of see him as against Christ, and that's certainly not wrong. I don't think it's a myth in a almost Dionysian sense. I mean, if you go, I think Nietzsche got some things wrong, and Mark Brahman does too, but he obviously got a hell of a lot right. But if you want to go to that dialectic in his first book of Apollo versus Dionysus, the Dionysian myth has some other elements to it. And I think Mark Brahman has laid these out and uncovered them in really fascinating ways, in a way that corrects Nietzsche and develops Nietzsche. There's some disagreement there too. But I think the Dionysian wisdom is that Sorelian myth of kind of, lack of self-identification, just loss of identity, crazed madness, drunkenness, and so on. I mean, that he is the god of wine, among other things. I think Apolloism is actually opposed to that in a way. Mm-hmm. And so much of where this started was an uncovering of Judaism and Christianity, and a kind of looking at both of those things through a new lens, so to speak. And so it is and I think this might even, in a way, be a detriment to its wide appeal. Mm-hmm. It is not a superstitious myth where we go and run out in the woods and listen to heavy metal music and worship Odin, and then go burn down a church. It is as opposed to that as it possibly can be. It is a bringing light to darkness. Mm-hmm. It is a religion that stresses rationality and analysis.
So politicized religion, basically.
It is a ideological core for what we ultimately want to do, which is, I mean, we ultimately look. If you're in this, you want to rule at some level. It is a powerful ideology that could be the basis of a coming superstate. Now, that's obviously quite grandiose, and I think as as it develops, I think it's going to develop away from what we're doing now with this first book and the first few books of an analysis of Judaism and Christianity and a critique of those things. I think it will develop into something where there'll be different layers to it, and it can kind of appeal to people on different ways. But I think it has to start off right. Yes, Apollo is the tutor of our race. I mean, he is a god that will protect us, but he is also a god of music. He's also a god of enlightenment, in the best sense of the word. He's a god of intelligence. So he isn't Odin or some kind of thing like this, expressing some primal chaotic energy from our Jungian soul. He is expressing our mind. And he is a rational god in that way. I think this might actually be a detriment to its success. The fact that it is civilizational and rational, but it is ultimately about protecting us, but it should be a kind of ideological core for a future leadership.
Well, it could be stable through rationality if it is purely interpreted in a political realist sense. But if it's put into like pure political realism, eventually it's going to detach itself from a degree of idealism, and it's probably going to be more of like this emphasis of political materialism, which is something that you saw more with like thinkers like Schmidt and Rosenberg, which I'm not saying it's a bad thing, because there's many different ways to justify a right, like in a real sense of like actual right-wing ideas, not these like modern liberals that call themselves right, like Fuentes, right. But it can be done through an idealistic or material framing. I can think of corporatism, like the economic system. I've read people like Leopold von Muller from Austria who justified it purely from materialist arguments, and people who've done it for idealist arguments like Gentile. And now if we talk about Nietzsche, I would say some of the problems with him is when people focus purely on the existentialist aspect, because then they start thinking about stupid, irrational things that don't really have a basis in reality, like thinking about thinking, I guess you could say, like in a practical sense, and it becomes an emphasis on language for deconstruction. But you can actually invert that, and that's how you end up with the focus on language as like an originary thing where you have generative anthropology. So you can actually probably adopt that into the Apollian understanding. At least that would just I probably don't fully agree with it, but that would be the best way to do it, I would say, because you're basically justifying anti-individualism, the civilizational method of tribalism into collectivism. You have an explanation for expansion, supremacy, colonialism, warfare that's detached from the moral arguments that liberals have, and it has an understanding of political realism that is Machiavellian and understands power. So like, I could think off the top of my head is that people like Gabenu, for example, or like Gunther, which were like the Nordic racialists, like in the Third Reich. A lot of those ideas were overlapped with
French from the 19th century, but he was deceived. Yeah.
And a lot of this also carried over the Gross, which is like a eugenicist, and there was some ideas that floated around with a guy called Ernst Haeckel before the Nazis, but then that all synthesized into Rosenberg's idea. What is your view like on the racial element? Do you see like the race of like Nordic or like Aryan as like an ethnogenesis thing? Do you think it's something detached from it? Because I know some people, when they hear Nordicism, they think we was like Kang Eurocentrism, other Europeans aren't white, but that's not what Nordicists say. They say that all the European peoples have a Nordic strain in them, it's just some more than others.
Right. I mean, Madison Grant was a Nordicist, and he wanted to protect North America as a Nordic territory, basically. The 24 Immigration Act, which he influenced, didn't even touch on Mexico. It was geared towards Eastern Europe, even Central Europe to a degree. I would say, I mean, obviously the Apollo's own genesis does come from the North, so there is a quality of that. We're not really interested in getting into intra-European disputes and going after Slavs or Mediterraneans or anything like that. I mean, not only do we not believe that, like, ideologically, we're all part of the same family. That's just unwise, politically speaking. But I think there is something to reviving a concept of Aryanism in the sense of who we are and what we are about, as opposed to a petty nationalist conception, which is going to defend the status quo and defend tradition for tradition's sake. One of the things that I've always believed, and Mark certainly does, I mean, yeah, tradition, we wouldn't have tradition if it didn't work to some degree. There's almost like a Darwinian level of tradition where, you know, the way of doing this works. Why would you change it? Why go on to a novelty when this works? I get that. But there is actually a lot of rot within traditionalism. And it started early, and we need to address that. And we also need to recognize that a lot of these ways aren't going to work in the future. And yes, most people have kind of homing mechanisms where they go back to what worked, they go back to home, but those people will also go extinct at some point. You need to recognize the situation we are in and break out of it and kind of revive a certain Aryan spirit from the past, but then also see how this is going to function in contemporary times. So I would say that we would juxtapose Aryanism to any form of petty nationalism that is, you know, again, the most successful form of the right now. I mean, it's not in power by any stretch, but it's in parliament, let's say, just populist nationalist parties. We are doing something different. We can lead them in a different direction. I think they are tapping into something real, but I do think that they are wrong in their ideological conception.
Well, it's a vague nationalism. I think his name is like Dicholu, which is like a French like proto-fascist, and he ended up being a collaborator with the Germans and Vichy. But one of his publications, I think it's called Fascist Socialism, he says that a vague nationalism is a tool of capitalism because it disrupts from the actual ideological underpinnings of a anti-capitalist nationalist movement, and then uses on fake nationalism basically to undermine real nationalist concerns, which I believe you see that nowadays with most of these like fake populists that go around. And as far as like the racial myths, there was also other thinkers like the 1938 Italian Fascist Manifesto. They didn't adopt necessarily Nordic; they adopted Aryan, and they kind of put it onto the entire European people, which just actually ended up happening in the Third Reich by 1943 to 45 when they dropped the Nordic stuff and didn't emphasize it as much. Some people would say that's because of necessity. They're in a world war, but I think it's because of a progression. Like A. James Greger has a good essay called National Socialism and Race on it. I'm not fully committed to like any ideology. I'm more interested like in socialism and nationalism, and like I'm an idealist as far as like I go. So that's what I'm more interested in. And when you're talking about we're not committed to traditionalism, there's actually a quote by Mussolini from Relativismo del Fascismo, which is a book where he's basically talking about how fascism is the true relativism. And in the context, he says, we are neither aristocrats or proletarians. We are neither traditionalists or modernists. We are neither reactionaries or of the future. Fascism will construct its own ideology to the temperaments that it wants. We are true relativists per excellence. We are Nietzsche's national will to power meets the nation, and that's basically his rundown on it. So he's not attributed himself to one value, and I think the problem is with a lot of people nowadays is that when it comes to these ideologies, they tend to overemphasize certain elements and aspects and hyper focus on that, and they're not really looking at the broader picture of actual politics as far as like analysis or strategy goes, or adopting themselves within a circumstance. And I think that's part of the intellectual bankruptcy and also the failure of a lot of these movements, at least in my view. It's probably not entirely related, but like, what's your views on National Justice Party with like Mikey Enoch, Stryker, Tony, and like Warren? I want to be talking with Warren on here pretty soon. But what do you think?
I don't really think it's going to go anywhere, to be honest. I think it's kind of like a political party based on TRS. And I mean, to be honest, but I think more ideologically speaking, it does seem to be highly reactionary and a kind of, they're anti-white and this kind of vague socialism. I mean, if you want to help out struggling white people, then I would recommend voting for the Democrats, and just investing in something that doesn't have that is extremely dubious when it comes to its prospects, and then is just kind of vague and incoherent when it comes to its ideology. I don't know what to say. And in terms of, there are these tests that you have to go through, and they seem to have wanted to reach. I don't know if they were successful or not. They seem to have wanted to reach out to disappointed January 6th rioters or whatever, and it's just really anathema to what I'm doing myself. It's fine. I'm not in communication with any of them. So
I have talked with Joel Davis a bit, and like there's obviously been some drama going on between you guys too. I don't know, like I want to talk with him sometime on here. Like I don't necessarily agree with everybody I bring on. Like my goal is just to kind of let them talk and kind of explain themselves. So like I'm not really interested with pushing one agenda. Like I would be okay having a rad lib or like a black Israelite come on here, like if they wanted to, but they probably wouldn't. But what would you say like your like impressions or interactions with like their strategy is? Like I never really gotten like a full explanation, but
I don't quite know what their strategy is. I mean, I talked with Joel a little over a year ago, and I was generally impressed. He was very into GA, and he had some interesting things to say. We talked a little bit about
GA now.
Okay, well, again, these people take on a new thing every few months. I can't keep up. He was very interested in it at the time, and whatever. I think he was talking to me. Oh, we want to go. We want to go find people in the military-industrial complex who will support us, and what. And it's like, okay,
so patron
whatever,
theory, but a mass movement.
Yeah, I remember just kind of like making fun of him one time when he was. It was after Trump lost, and it was like, we have to, it struck me as LARPing, and it was particularly kind of toxic because from my standpoint, in the sense that he's an Australian and he's, engaging in treason in another country on Twitter. And it's just kind of, he was basically calling for a coup. And, if you do that and you're an American citizen, you can be arrested for that. Yeah, you can be arrested for that kind of talk. You're probably not going to be. They're going to take it as tough talk, locker room talk, as Trump might say. But it's just not mature. I think he's now gone on to some kind of Catholic thing. I don't. That's what I get the impression of.
So that's what Thamster is doing with some people, but like I like Tyler. He's actually the one who gave me your contact information, but I didn't have a phone service at the so I had to wait a while so I could talk with you. As I was like using like this like really like gay bootleg app, and I had like a brief conversation with you on it one time with like a generated phone number. But yeah, it's kind of funny.
I kind of vaguely remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, oh, what's up? Some journalist was trying to get me to go on a documentary, but I directed him to you instead because he was wanting to know what the alt-right thinks about the Capitol siege. And I was like, oh, I disavow it, but if you want to talk to somebody who's more of a media savvy, I sent them to you.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember I got a few emails after January 6th where they were like journalists who like wanted me to support it or something. They're like, oh, Richard Spencer must be behind this. And I was like,
No. Yeah, I remember telling him. I remember telling the guy like, no, like the alt-right actually was very critical of it. They disavowed Trump. They didn't support it. Like nobody really did. Even the people who don't necessarily identify as alt-right, that is dissident right, didn't like it. It was just mainly conservatives or like
it's just
America
mainly
First
conservatives.
People.
Yeah, America First people. Peter Brumlow or whatever. Like, yeah, they're into this. They'll gobble up any junk food that's lying on the street. But I don't know what Joel's up to now. He seems to be interested in Catholicism and whatever. I just see a lot of drama, and I just don't.
Well, part of
I don't really have interest. I mean, if someone wants to talk to me genuinely, that's fine. But yeah, I'm
not really interested in internet drama unless anybody like specifically targets me. Then I'll engage, and as dirty as I have to get when it comes to it. But like other than that, I'm not particularly interested. Like on Telegram, like I associate this group called Futurism Forever. Then I have the Pacifist. He's like some Indian guy who's married to a German woman, and he's really big into like World War II revisionism. And he's also like big into traditionalism, and the futurist guys don't like that, so they always argue over it. Then they bitch at me about me, like I should ban either side. I'm like, I don't really care. Right. I don't care. Like Keith noticed it, and he's like, "Dude, what the hell is this?" It's the drama, man. It's crazy.
I don't know. I'm really not focused on anything outside of people who I collaborate with. I am going off in a direction, and if people want to follow that, that's great. If they want to have a respectful dialogue, that's great. If they don't, that's also fine. I'm not into big tenting anymore. I mean, I don't think it's possible or desirable. And so I mean, the impression I got from Joel was, he got really pissed off when I published. I think I posted like a Star Wars kid meme over him calling, like treasonously I mean, he's not a citizen, but calling for a coup. And it's just like, this is ridiculous. And then everything else I get is just, attack. I don't have a lot of interest. Now, granted, a lot of Apolloists are they get kind of edgy online too, and they want to, bull aside people.
Well, there's a couple of them in my Telegram
we're not
chat.
We're not exactly.
There's a couple of them in my Telegram
not
chat.
Exactly innocent, but yeah. I mean, I kind of get it, but it's just the way of the world on social media. But it's certainly not what I'm focused on. And if people want to create friend and enemy distinctions over, say, Christ, then you know which side I side on. I mean,
well that's a conversation clear on Telegram too. Is there's this whole like Christ first versus race first going on. And a lot of the race first guys are like a lot of them are pagan, but you also have a lot of them that are kind of like siege tards. So it kind of it's kind of muddied a bit. And then some of the
that's the problem with the alt-right is that it gets my allergies are going nuts, and then
it's fine.
A couple of mosquitoes got in here and they attacked me. Very rude. They came into my own home and then bit me in here. I mean, that's just
want some of that tasty blood, I guess.
Yeah. That's what they want. Yeah, they are blood first. But yeah, I think that there was a time. I mean, what is the quote by like Henry Kissinger of, he was talking about like 1960s leftists, and he was like, when things don't matter, like when you don't have to maintain a parliamentary coalition or something, when it generates this kind of extremism and hurt feelings. So, the neocons emerged out of, what was it, Alcove B at City College of New York. They were the Trotskyists attacking the Stalinist, and none of it mattered at some level. It was when it doesn't actually matter, it becomes hyper ideological and hyper shrill. And I see a lot of that happening. It's probably inevitable. It's the way of the world. But I think in some ways it's kind of good. I mean, I think that's where Mark and I are, where it's like we kind of, there was this big tent coalition and it didn't work. And it actually didn't even last that long. And we need to recognize that. And sometimes you have to come and, like Jesus, come with a sword and separate the wheat from the chaff. I mean, like it's sometime infighting is probably overall not good, but it might be necessary in the sense that you actually do have to hash out what really matters for you and which direction do you want to go in.
Well, I think that's the point of like any successful ideology that got into power, actually, because you see that with like, if I'm going to appeal to the left, I can just bring up in the Soviet Union when Lenin was on the rise with the Bolshevik Revolution. He crushed all independent working class movements. He crushed all opposition and solidified it into his own bloc of democratic centralism. He got rid of all the Soviet like Bolshevik controlled trade unions, for example. Solidified all of it. Like Hitler did the same thing with his opposition. It's like there's a time for like many different ideologies, but when it comes to an actual serious academic movement, it in a way it kind of engages with the opposition the same way our liberal order does, or how Fuentes does with his own political enemies. But the difference is there's an actual ideology motivating it, kind of like with liberalism, whereas Nick doesn't. It's just more vague.
Right.
But
yeah, it's very vague with Nick, and it's like friendship nationalism or something, which I think is probably what the NJP is ultimately. It's friendship nationalism.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever. We're not doing that, even though, you know, I'm friends with Mark and so on. But you know, I don't know what to say. Like, if this really bothers you, if you really do preference something above this, or if you are so terrified of ever leaving the hamster wheel of the right, where you just, you know, how much content can you get out of just every week? You know, every week there's some new outrage that you can complain about, some anti-white outrage. And if you just want to complain about that till the end of time, you can do that. There will be no shortage of material. I don't want to do that. And if you are hostile towards new ideas and new directions, then fine. That demonstrates who you are. It reveals who you are. It's good. It's probably necessary. I think some of this infighting just has to happen, and we just kind of have to separate. And that's fine. I mean, I don't identify with the online right anymore. I don't have much in common. I mean, you're saying like no voting. I mean, I voted for Joe Biden. I voted for Democrats. I voted against marijuana legalization. That was kind of my right-wing thing in Montana. I lost that referendum, but I just don't, I don't know. It does not interest me, and I'm going off in my own direction, and there's no big tent. It's a small tent. That's the only way I see going forward as being productive.
I mean, I think that makes sense. I think outrage porn in our spheres is just really an utter cancer. And I think you're right in saying that there's a lot of, well, everybody's allergic to new ideas, and everybody wants to be a reactionary in some sort or another, and just always get mad. But there has to be a time that we just all calm down and just decide to move forward.
Yeah. And I don't think we can move. I don't think I can go in this direction being tied to people whom I have to like placate or something. I just, you know, I'm just not interested. And also I've noticed from most all of these people, it's never reciprocal. You know, after Charlottesville, the knives are out. I mean, I have a long memory. I know all this kind of stuff. And I'm not going to like go back to Fuentes. Like, I'm not going to call up Fuentes and be like, hey, pal, man, I feel sorry for you, man. Let's put our bygones be bygones. It's okay, right? We're all in this boat. Like, the establishment hates us. No, I'm not doing any of that shit. I'm not doing any of that shit with anyone.
Initially, I wanted to ask you. Yeah, initially I wanted to ask you, like, you know, why is it that you seem to be so abrasive and, like, you know, you say things that do kind of like upset like a lot of people on the right, and I noticed that especially like in some of your speech, and now I kind of understand why. Well, it's kind of like they all kind of like took a shit on you. So, you know, why are you going to even try with a lot of these people when they're not willing to, you know, be reciprocal? They're not, they want you to prove yourself to them. So, you know, why even bother? when they're not even
right. And I'm
bringing
not
new
their
ideas to the
fucking
table.
dancing monkey, you know? I mean, that was the other thing. Sometimes I'll do some tweet which is reactionary and is just some, you know, reacting to outrage porn, basically. And they'll be like, oh, Spencer's back. Well, this is what we like. This is what we like. And it's like, well, this isn't actually what I like. You know, this was just kind of me kind of off the cuff, shooting from the hip once in a while. I'm not your dancing monkey that tells you what you want to hear. I'm not interested. And like, you know, you might get that tweet once in a while. It's kind of meaningless because other people will tweet that too. And, you know, what I'm doing is going to divide you. It's going to divide the group. But we need to do that. We need to kind of separate things off, and we need to be clear about what we want and what we ultimately believe in. And I think that going back to some just kind of vague populism is, you know, kind of strikes me as like kind of like Jimmy Doreism or something. I mean, I like Jimmy Dore. I'm
like
subscribed
Marxist
to his
populism.
Yeah, exactly. Like I like Jimmy Dore. I'm subscribed to his show, and I think it's funny, and I'll watch a lot of them. And I think it'd be a cool guy to have a beer with. But it's just vague reactionary stuff. It's, you know, why don't we have healthcare right now? You know, and it's like, well, actually, there are reasons why we don't have Medicare for all. And you can actually explain these things. There are answers to those rhetorical questions. And this just kind of vague, the people are fed up or whatever. I'm just done. I don't care about any of that stuff. And I think it's also good. I mean, one of the things I was saying, like, I do have feet in two camps. I to an extent. I mean, I think like someone like Ed is not. I doubt Ed will be an Apolloist. I get along with Ed quite well. We can be productive together. I was working on his book all day. It's almost done. But I mean, I think what he's talking about, which is, you know, on some level, he's bringing in a lot of the stuff that has been with the movement for a while. We did a book, Making Sense of Race, that's a kind of go-to, you know, first step towards understanding the biological reality of race. I think it's good to do that. But he went very further afield from that. He talked about religion. He talked about the Jewish question. He talked about ethno-nationalism. He talked about ethnogenesis. He brought up very interesting things that the movement actually hasn't really talked about from a Darwinian standpoint. What he's doing now in terms of like civilizational decline and decay, and what is happening to our gene pool after the Industrial Revolution, this is really groundbreaking, serious stuff, and it's historical genetic analysis. That definitely interests me. That's an analysis of society. It's not basically saying the people are angry, they're going to rise up against the establishment.
Well,
it's
there's actually
basically
a content
saying,
creator.
Why is the civilization breaking down?
There's a content creator we'd like called Ubersoy. He's actually a friend of mine and Anon's friend, but he's not the same as us ideologically. He's actually a classical liberal, but he's adopted a lot of Dutton's talking points. And he used him very heavily for this video on BreadTube on why is leftist YouTube so trans. And he was basically looking at the genetic aspect that was actually making them all do this. And then there was another one on homosexuality that he also did. But as far as like genetic stuff, I can think of some of the stuff that was coming from Gabanu, Chamberlain, Grant, and like these various different eugenicists, anthropologists. Like Haeckel, is that they were saying that there was brain size and skull differences, for example. That's something that's been validated of recent by modern science, but it's kind of something that they kind of sweep under the rug and they don't talk about. And there's also the stuff as far as anthropology goes, they use it very heavily in forensic for cold cases. That's how they determine the sex of a person, the race of the person too. That's a lot of stuff they don't really talk about. And a lot of it's just a coping mechanism by an appeal to authority by liberals. But as far as like the ideological strategies go, it definitely seems like the populism itself is just more of a circumvented way to help create like a muscular liberalism within the right. Within the left, it's more of a progressive liberalism, and that's how it's maintaining itself by these the synthesis of the liberal ideology and the society itself through its base and superstructure. And it then attacks anybody who's opposition. So like what I've noticed with like people like Joel is like, I'm not attacking him, I just want to say this, but the patron theory of politics that they're putting forward, which comes from C.A. Bonn, which it's built off of like de Juvenal, the idea that they were going to take power by appealing to the upper class, it's kind of similar to some of the stuff Moldbug was talking about when it comes to like aristocrats versus aristocrats, or upper class versus upper class being all political revolution. It's not like this proletarian versus bourgeois. It's always a different person who's bourgeois fighting bourgeois. And I think that's what he was appealing to for his strategy. But the problem is that the modern liberal system benefits these types of people so much. I don't see how it would actually help them to do that.
And they don't gain anything from him is also the problem. Like if you're going to put yourself in service of them, you have to demonstrate that you can help them achieve something. And I don't see what outside of like will ideologically justify you. I mean, I just don't see it. I don't disagree with some of those conceptions. And I think one of the key ways to understand the current woke left is basically white middle class virtue and status signaling. So they are using that against a aristocracy or a perceived aristocracy, or in some ways people below them, they're punching down. But they are using that ideology to gain status. I mean, I think that's very clear. And this is coming from the middle class on a very, like, in terms of BLM ideology, not just like, you know, African Americans in Ferguson or something, but like the BLM ideology and the sanctification of George Floyd and tearing down Confederate statues. Like this is a middle class thing through and through. And they are kind of using it to gain status within the system. The Me Too movement's another example of this. But so I think you need to understand this on a class level. I don't disagree with kind of a patron theory of politics in the sense that that's how we would operate. But I would kind of question the, you know, we speak for the people, we speak for the proletariat, or this always strikes me as just exceedingly vague, totally unformed.
It's a tool because like Lenin, he did this in the State of Revolution, not State Revolution. Imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism, and the way he defines it is by exportation of capital. So it can only be defined for bourgeois Western states. But if you look at actual imperialism, where it's the domination and control of another country, the Soviet Union obviously engaged in it, but they will deny this and instead use Lenin's definition. And it's because it's a tool. It's more of a redefining of language as a form of propaganda. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but you have to look at what is the ideological underpinning for it. And I don't really see much of an ideological motivation between a lot of that. Besides like the failures of like these other strategies, like I've been called black-pilled because I don't really see a point very much in organizing. So like there's a lot of people too who bring up like these more like violent ways to do things. So like and one of them I could think of is like a lot of people stand the Iron March stuff, but they don't realize that stuff's actually been tried before in Italy during the years of lead with a guy called Franco Freda. I did a video on him, but Freda's idea is that
the 70s where they were having this terrorism So I did a video on him, but Freda his whole idea was that the fascists should do political terrorism to destabilize the state, and then they should pin it on the left, or they should infiltrate leftists and use leftist rhetoric to make them commit terrorism to make the state destabilize, basically. And he was working with the CIA and also the
Italian secret intelligence while the left was working with the KGB, and he was also infiltrating them and making them do this. So it actually almost worked, but the whole thing imploded, and then he got to huge legal battles where he almost got put in prison for life, but he got acquitted twice, and they found out he actually did all of it. So now they can't do anything about it because he was acquitted twice. But that's aside the point. That's been done before, and it doesn't work. And a lot of these people stand that nowadays with like accelerationism and everything. It doesn't work just as much as mass movements doesn't work, or trying to do these appeals to the liberal power structure. In a way, there's probably more validity to what Nick Land is saying on political analysis, where it's just going to become the liberals are the aristocrats and we're all going to become the proles and the peasants. And there's kind of no way to actually challenge it. At least that's what I'm starting to come to the conclusion of. And I've had people tell me I'm black-pilled for that, but what is the point of praxis if you can't even engage in the real world? And if the other method to do things is violent, but you can't even do that either. So like what is the point? That's pretty much my view.
Yeah, maybe this is a hope and not a analysis or strategy, but I think that sometimes when you come to these conclusions of like white liberals are the aristocrats and we're all their peasants, we might very well be witnessing a breakdown within our lifetime of this order that's kind of congealed right now. And I do think that within my lifetime, I'll see the end of the American empire, or a disintegrating one. So I'm not sure these liberals, Swipple types are kind of long for this world.
Well,
I would just say that. But what comes after that is a question. And it's, that's an interesting question.
Well, if you press the liberals, they kind of like they do the like actual liberal ideology is what they talk of. But if there is moments where they go mask off, like instances I can think of this is actually classical liberals when they originally engaged in revolution. They stouted pacifism, reform, the rights of man, but they were just as willing to like basically kill non-whites and genocide them. Then they were also as willing to basically kill the king and like entire royal families to basically get political ends. And that's when they go mask off. And there's also instances of this like in our society where they basically crack down on dissident ideology. And then there's even times in recordings, like I could think of like Biden, like you can find stuff of him basically saying racist stuff, but like that's probably what he actually thinks, but he just puts a mask on to have political power.
Yes. Biden might be the most, more racist than Trump. I mean, he said pretty remarkable things, but again, he's made an alliance with the kind of middle class or millennial woke crowd, so they don't press him on it. But yeah, the latest one was the, Haiti. If Haiti sunk into the sea, no one would care.
Yeah, shitholes.
Yeah, it was basically like it's a shithole country, and Kamala Harris basically called them murderers and rapists, like in her immigration speech, where she was like, "Don't come, just don't." It was her like 2015 speech. There's no content-wise. There was very little difference. It was just all style. And Trump is like, Trump. It's they're tearing down our country. They're rapists. They're maniacal puppy-killing monsters. And I'm sure some are not criminals, but I'm not so sure. That's the Trump style. The Kamala Harris is like, y'all just don't come here, please. Just don't. We'll kick you out. We'll arrest you. Just don't do it. And it's just different styles. They're saying the same thing, and you can unmask both. Trump is kind of bullshit, and Kamala Harris and Biden are kind of
in a way, like Trump is like the right wing version of like AOC was. It's basically just a grift to help strengthen the current mainstream political order, at least in my view. I know some people would probably disagree, but is there anything you want to say, Anon?
Right now? Let me think.
Because I know you had like a couple questions for him.
You can ask me some quick fire things. We better quit soon because I'm
all right.
Okay.
Oh, we should probably go for
super chats. We do have super chats as well. There's only four of them.
Okay.
Four of them.
Yeah, there's only 4 of them. So let's get on the super chats then. All right. So the first one I got, it's from Colby Nelson, and it says, Spencer, do you think getting vetted for TDS pool parties is a good idea or just asking for trouble?
So TDS is this is TRS stuff?
Yeah, the pool party vetting. Yeah. Asking if that's a good idea or not.
I don't know what's going on in terms of pool party vetting. I don't think it's a terrible thing. I don't think you're.
I can affirm they're very secure.
Yeah. I mean, there was some doxing of TRS people recently, but those were more kind of auxiliary types. Yeah, I think it's probably fine. I mean, don't take my word for it. I'm not encouraging you or anything. But I'm not going to say like, don't ever do that. You're probably most likely going to be fine.
All right. So the next one is from Dr. Tanky, and he says, hey, everyone, I met Spencer back in MPI 2013. I was the only Canadian there. Question, Spencer, when did you start questioning the Holodomor? Cheers from Canada.
Yeah, the questioning the Ukrainian kind of state planned
well, they kind of deserved it. But...
yeah, I mean, I don't know. Probably a lot of that was from my now ex-wife, but that's not really an important issue to me. I don't know. I guess I do have a certain cringe when it's like, this is our Holocaust or something. I just...
Well, like I question it just like I question any genocide the United States brings up, because like my view is that a lot of these are basically just false flags or basically ways to undermine opposition. But we also look in the context of why it's done, because like the United States actively engages in this stuff still. Like we support Rojava, which is like a anarcho-communist group, or the YPG, which is like Kurdish, and those groups engage in ethnic cleansing of Syrians and also Turkish people, and we basically back it. Then it was also for many years we denied the Armenian genocide. So the United States really has no room to moral fag about genocide. No. As far as like the Soviet Union going about it, personally, I do think like I like the Ukrainian people. Like I support the National Corps, Azov, but like the Holodomor was something within a historical context they actually deserved, because one, it was theft of state properties and state tools, which the peasants took, and two, they were actively rebelling against a power that was in control of them, which is basically force. So it's basically justified on those grounds, and that's not really something I'm wanting to argue with. But
yeah.
Okay, the next one is from Captain Need a Drink. Yo, Richard, what do you think would happen if the college tour was tried today? P.S. I can't sneed.
I can't sneed?
Some meme.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know that meme. Yeah, it's interesting because I mean, in terms of the college tour, we're not at the energy level that we were in 2016 to 2017 of like alt-right, Richard Spencer, Donald Trump, all that kind of stuff. So I think it could be in a way better, because what I liked about the college tour was actually talking to people and delivering the message. And so I was not into the legal battles and bureaucratic battles and whatever. So I think it in a way could be better. I did college visits in 2012 where I would speak to like 20 people, I remember. And Antifa still would show up, but they weren't violent at that time. So I'm for that, but there's not really the energy level for that kind of thing. But I think actually, in terms of the bureaucratic battles, I think we would lose those bureaucratic battles. And I don't think it would be allowed to occur, basically, where we are now. I think we've gone several paces down, in a direction of suppression of our ideas at universities than we were even in 2017. I don't think it would happen again.
Well, I think the problem is that like obviously like there's a sentibility like in me wanting to like do free speech because like it is like a product of America. Like I am an American, but I'm also very critical of America. And a lot of these rights, they're just entitlements. They're not really like a real thing. And when you are in a society, it only really gives you entitlements because it wants stability. And then it's also willing to take away those entitlements when it's about hegemony. And the problem with people who become free speech absolutists, it's or just like any type of absolutism, these are things that are kind of created just to be temporary, and they can be retracted very quickly. So when you question orthodoxy, you're kind of you're just asking for it to happen. It's really power talking. And like besides that, when it comes to these sensibilities that can be thought up from a quill stroke, like the founding fathers, they have as much like transgenderism or like civil rights or like these other things, they have as much legitimacy as the Constitution or the Bill of Rights, because they're basically just propaganda tools to maintain power. And I think that's the problem when people get in these legal battles. They're just going to throw it out, or they're basically just going to get you in something and then completely destroy you. That's what they want to do.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, again, I think we would lose bureaucratic and legal battles if we wanted to do it. Now, could we do it, since the spotlight's off me, could we do it in certain ways of like genuinely going and talking to a group? I might be interested in that, but it was just of a certain time. I wish it weren't the case. I liked the idea, and I thought there was a lot of energy behind it. I think the main thing is that like I don't think the alt-right as a movement would even support it, because they don't like me, to be frank. So it was a very funny thing.
Well, I've noticed that too, is that like I'm really into like historicism and like economics and also philosophy, which like my channel is mainly focusing on like third position stuff related to that. And I've debated some of these other like quote unquote white nationalists or like national socialists, and they don't even know their own theory, and two, a lot of the times it's just reactionary politics repackaged into it, and they're not really like a real academic ideology with motivations. They don't have a real intellectual core. It's just kind of like, I hate brown people.
Yeah,
and just doing stupid crap like saying
I
racial
hate the
slurs on a
liberals because they're anti-white and stuff like that. I mean, all these kind of stuff are taken on by Tucker, and I think there's a kind of vicious circle going on where the alt-right is influenced by Tucker. They want to sound like Tucker or something, and I think Tucker wants to kind of take the memes from the alt-right. I just don't have any interest in this stuff because it's not worth my time. It can't actually go anywhere, and it's not interesting. And so I just really want out of it.
Understandable.
Yeah.
So I have one last question.
Sure.
If you could tell anything to young political dissidents nowadays, like what would you tell them? Like, and maybe just to kind of get out of the rabbit race, or like whatever.
It's funny. I think I would tell them definitely connect with people behind the scenes, and I probably don't join some activist group, to be honest, and try to support people who you believe in, who are advancing an ideology, and know that friendship nationalism doesn't really lead anywhere, and it could very likely get you doxxed. If anything will get you doxxed, it's that. And try to support people who are actually moving the ball forward, as opposed to becoming part of the Borg, basically. Or what was it in Star Trek? The Borg, wasn't that? You will be assimilated. Just becoming part of this massive horde.
Jack reaction.
Yeah, it's just not going anywhere. And so you're not helping. You're not pushing discourse forward every time you attack some liberal on Twitter. It's just not doing anything. And just recognize that. But yeah, keep your head down, try to pursue a career where you could actually help people or support people who are doing good work. But I don't think most people want that. I think when they join, TRS or whatever, it's like they want to be part of the Groiper army. Like they want to be part of it. They want to be like leading it, or at least being in some democratic kind of coalition with it or something. That just doesn't go anywhere. It's never going to win. It just simply won't. And if, for those people who want to do that, I don't think they're even listening to me anyway. So they're just going to do it. But with people who actually do want a different world, you have to pursue a different path. And that's going to involve avoiding those types of groups.
So stop being self-destructive.
Stop being self-destructive. Stop engaging in friendship nationalism.
Well, besides
try to, I remember having a discussion with people, this is a number of years ago, it was like 2015 or so. And I was saying, like, this was a time when there were all these people who had joined the conservative movement effectively. And then they eventually got doxxed by Katie McHugh. Like Scott Greer, all these, they're all like just working at the Daily Caller, working at WorldNet Daily, they had all these conservative movement sinecure jobs that did not pay great. And you were just involved with sludge, basically content sludge for conservatives. And I was just saying, like, why would you even do this? Like, what are you accomplishing? Like, we're farther away from them than we are from like communists. Like, why are you doing this? And it's like, some populist justification. But I remember saying, like, I more could be accomplished by someone keeping their head down and joining the New York Times. Like, much more could be accomplished by having our man infiltrating the New York Times or academia or whatever, keeping his head down or her head down and doing something that doesn't raise the hackles.
That was something Steven Pinker noticed when he talked about the alt-right, how there's a lot of academics actually coming from it, like early on. And a lot of them were involved in a lot of this biological type of arguments, but a lot of them ended up getting purged from academia before they fully got into academia. If they actually fully infiltrated, that would have created it probably would have been on the same level as, like, not exactly the same, but Jordan Peterson when he was first going against academia for like very briefly, shortly on, if you remember that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people got purged. I think there was also an interesting opening, like, there was a discussion, and this is actually in the Making Sense of Race book. There's a few paragraphs discussing it, but the alt-right did have a tremendous impact. And, even in some of these academic journals, they were kind of opening up the gates of talking about Kevin McDonald's theory. And, Nathan Confess, who's a kind of biological realist, but he's Jewish himself, and he's very hostile towards Kevin McDonald, and Kevin McDonald's hostile towards him. But Ed Dutton actually got pieces published. Like, there was a kind of opening for that, but I think those doors have been closed now. And we have to understand, like, what is it they say in investing? You go with the trend until it ends, or the trend's your friend until it ends, and then you bend. I think that's the line, or something like this. That's at least my line. You go with the trend. The trend's your friend until it ends, and then you bend. You have, like, your enemies are they're not going to just let you take advantage of them endlessly. They're going to crack the nut, and that's when you have to bend. And I don't, we did have certain openings. I don't think those openings are there anymore. So what I'm saying in terms of infiltration is always keeping your head down, not being I'm not racist, or I'm not Richard Spencer. I counter-signal Richard Spencer, actually, but I'm a right-wing populist and academic. No, that is academia.
It's basically just keep your mouth shut till you're in the right position.
Yeah, basically declare yourself a fucking feminist. That's what I'm saying. Like that's what infiltration is. It's not being like who is like Darren Beatty or something, like not doing fake news and being like, oh, I'm a right-wing populist, but I'm not racist. It's not doing that crap. They see through that crap and it doesn't go anywhere anyway. But it's not that. It's basically actually infiltrating it. And that is much more difficult. It's much more psychologically difficult.
So
that would be something in the way that like working at the Daily Caller and then getting fired when you get doxxed by your ex-girlfriend or whatever. What did any of that accomplish? All those people got crushed and they dispersed. But that person who doesn't get doxxed because he's genuinely on the inside, that interests me.
So, like, one thing I can think of that would probably be interesting to get your criticism of before we end this. There's a lot of people, especially on Telegram, because that is where I mostly hang out with. A lot of them push the whole accelerationism, dropout, like this weird, like, Ludditism that's completely anti-civilization. Then they also push, like, siege and all that stuff. To me, it just glows really bad. But like, what's your whole analysis on it?
Glows in the sense that it's a federal operation or whatever.
Well, it kind of. Well, anybody who preaches violence, it kind of. I don't want to call them that, but I do say it glows in the sense that it attracts.
Or they're just boomers and they're boomer posting.
Well, a lot of them are zoomers.
Yeah, well, Zoomers and boomers have a lot in common. Yeah, but like you do weirdly hear that from boomers, where like on the one hand they're like normie liberals, but then they'll also be like, oh, we should just take over everything. You know, they just flip back and forth between like utter conformism and then just like angry, pointless revolt. But yeah, I mean, the thing is accelerating whether you like it or not. I mean, we aren't accelerating this thing. This thing is it's a train on a track flying downhill, and it's seeming to tip over. I mean, this system is, I do believe, and this is, you could call this wishful thinking or a hope. I do believe that we're going to see a breakdown of the American empire in my lifetime. That is in the next 40 to 50 years.
Well, Buchanan predicted by 45, I believe, and suicide as a superpower.
Yeah. So I think we're going to see it. And it's not even about demographics per se. Like in the way that people are always like, well, we can't win Texas if there are too many Hispanics. I don't even believe that. I think that's
Hispanics will be doctored into the category of white. You already see that.
They will. They're intermarrying with whites to a large percentage. They're increasingly going Republican.
They're even doing it with Wignats too.
Yeah, I think that all that stuff, all those like VDARE memes or whatever, that's just or Groyper memes, just objectively incorrect. But I don't think it's going to be purely demographics. Remember, immigration, due to COVID, it slowed down. It's just kind of petering out. We're not being just like tidal waved in the way that some of these right wingers said we were. I think it's due to like financial issues, the overextension of the empire, the lack of legitimacy of the empire, and a kind of dumbing down and loss of intelligence of the entire public. And this just advancement of a just evil and malign individualist ideology that we call woke. Like all of these things trend towards the end of an empire. We've seen this before. All of these trends track with things we've seen in Rome. This thing is accelerating, whether we like it or not. We aren't influenced. We maybe influence that acceleration at some point or the other. But yeah, just this, I've never liked the kind of Luddite meme, if you want to call it that. Just the like, oh, I'm going to go grill steaks with my trad wife and we're just leaving.
Yeah, they do the Varg stuff. Then some of them stand people like Pol Pot and Kaczynski. And like, there's a publication I posted on my Telegram on Green Anarchism where they interviewed Kaczynski. and he basically talked about having like gay experiences with another kid his age back then, and how he almost kind of sex changed too.
What?
So kind of, yeah. I posted it in my chat. You probably missed it.
Oh yeah. Well.
Yeah.
Oh
And
wait.
a lot of them have pine trees in their names. Like one of my rules in my chat is like no pine trees allowed because they always spam gay porn or something when they join.
Yeah, no pine.
I mean, it seems like the way
if someone posts a Groiper meme, they're done for me. If you post your own face as a Groiper, or you post some frog thing, just like.
I think my favorite
you're either
was,
blocked or I'm never taking you seriously.
I think my favorite one was Siege Groipered, and it was a Groiper with a skull mask called in Siege. It's kind of funny.
I think I've seen such things. Yeah,
the Mike Enoch Groiper.
Yeah,
there's even a Groiper meme of you.
Oh, I'm kind of surprised about that. Okay.
Yeah.
I won't repost that. Yeah, it's just a kind of sign that you've lost the plot, basically, and yeah, I'm done.
I guess that's everything.
Okay.
Anything else want to ask him before we end this, Alan?
No. I just wanted to say, Richard, it was a wonderful conversation, and you are a very deep and complex figure, and I was very happy to.
Yeah. No, this is a good convo. I'd be happy to come back on, and I'm glad we're in touch. You guys have my contacts and stuff like that, so it's good to be in touch with smart people. So that's good.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right, guys. Good luck.
Oh,
take care.
Take care. Bye.